Everyone feared the CEO, who thought no one could match her mind until one silent janitor challenged her to a simple game of chess. What happened in those 3 moves changed her life, her company, and everything she believed about power forever. The evening sun poured through the glass windows of the towering Solvane Industries, building its light falling over polished marble floors and silver elevators at the top floor. Behind massive oak doors sat the woman everyone feared and admired, Olivia Sterling, the youngest CEO in the company's history. Her brilliance was unmatched, her confidence unshakable, and her arrogance legendary. Every employee knew her rules: no delays, no excuses, and never challenge her word or her pride. She was ruthless in boardrooms, elegant in interviews, and sharp in every move she made, both in business and in life. She often told people life was nothing more than a chessboard, and she was always the queen. That afternoon, the company hosted its annual staff gala, a celebration for achievements, awards, and appearances. Olivia stood on the stage, her tailored white suit glowing under the lights, her voice cold, yet commanding. She said, "Thank you for your loyalty, but remember, this company rewards the best, and only the best." The crowd applauded, half out of respect, half out of fear. When the speech ended, employees gathered around the buffet tables, laughing nervously, pretending to relax. Among them was Daniel Brooks, the janitor, who worked night shifts to support his mother and younger sister. He was quiet, kind, and invisible to most people. He moved through the hall, silently wiping tables, picking glasses, never expecting anyone to notice him. But that evening, fate had other plans. In one corner of the hall stood a chessboard handcrafted with glass pieces, a gift from a foreign investor. Olivia loved chess. It was her escape, her symbol of intellect. She often challenged guests to play, but none ever dared. She stood by the table, sipping her drink, when her assistant joked loudly, "No one here would last 2 minutes against you, ma'am." The room chuckled. She smirked and said, "Then perhaps I will have to marry the one who beats me." Everyone laughed. She added playfully, "Beat me in chess, and I will marry you." It was meant as a joke, but her voice carried pride, arrogance, and certainty that no one could ever win against her. The employees clapped nervously. Not one dared approach. Then a quiet voice spoke from the back, "May I try, ma'am?" The laughter faded. Heads turned. Daniel stood there in his janitor uniform, holding a mop, his eyes steady and calm. Olivia's lips curled into a half smile. She said, "You want to challenge me?" The janitor nodded politely, "Yes, ma'am." The crowd began to whisper. Some laughed, others sneered. One of the executives muttered, "This should be amusing." Olivia raised a brow and said, "Fine, come play." She sat at one side of the table, her white queen shining under the light. Daniel sat opposite her, his hands rough from work, his uniform faded, but his gaze sharp and focused. Olivia said, "Let's make it quick. I have meetings tomorrow." The pieces were set, the board ready, the room gathered around, phones out, ready to film what they thought would be a humiliation. But in the silence that followed, something strange filled the air. Daniel's hand moved first, his fingers steady, his expression calm. Olivia moved next, her smirk never fading. But after the second move, her brow furrowed. After the third, her smirk disappeared completely. Daniel moved again, 3 quiet, precise steps that made the crowd lean in. Olivia stared at the board, disbelief creeping in her perfect face. Her king trapped, cornered, no way out. "Checkmate," he said softly. The hall fell silent. You could hear hearts beating, eyes widened. Olivia froze. She stared at the board, unable to comprehend. She had lost, and in just 3 moves. The silence in the hall was heavy, like a storm about to break. Every employee stood, frozen, eyes wide and mouths open. Olivia Sterling, the queen of Solvane Industries, had been beaten in 3 moves by the janitor, the woman who crushed rivals in negotiations and dismantled egos in seconds, now sat staring at the board like a statue. Daniel sat still, respectful, his eyes lowered, as if what he had done was nothing. He whispered softly, "Excuse me, ma'am, I didn't mean to cause any disrespect." Olivia blinked, as if waking from a dream, her voice trembling slightly. "How did you do that?" she asked. No arrogance, no command, only genuine confusion. Daniel smiled faintly. "My grandfather taught me when I was a child, ma'am. He used to say chess is about humility, knowing when to move and when to wait. You attack too fast." She leaned back in her chair, her pride wounded, but her curiosity awakened. She whispered, "Too fast." Her assistant ran over. "Nervous, ma'am. Should I escort him out?" Olivia raised her hand. "No," she said coldly, but quietly I asked him to play, and he won fair and square, the crowd murmured. She stood slowly, her eyes fixed on Daniel. Then she said, everyone back to work, the party is over. The employees scattered, whispering, laughing, some filming the moment that would surely become legend in Solvane Industries, the CEO defeated by the janitor. When the hall emptied, Olivia stood alone, near the window, her mind racing. She had spent her whole life proving she was the smartest, the fastest, the most strategic, but in 3 moves this quiet man had undone years of ego. She turned her gaze to the city lights below, her reflection staring back in the glass. Her assistant came back hesitantly. Ma'am, that was unbelievable. She cut him off sharply. Send for him tomorrow morning, my office at 9. That night, Daniel went home to his small apartment, his sister asleep on the couch, and his mother sewing by the lamp. He told her nothing, just smiled quietly. When she asked why he looked thoughtful, he said, just a long night, Mom, nothing more. The next morning, he arrived at the building, his badge trembling slightly in his hand. Security stared as he was escorted to the top floor for the first time. The elevator opened to white marble and silver mirrors. Olivia waited behind her desk, her usual confidence restored, but something new flickered in her eyes, curiosity and respect. Sit down, she said calmly. He obeyed. She looked at him for a long moment, then asked, where did you learn to play like that? Daniel hesitated. My grandfather, ma'am. He was a teacher. Before he passed away, we used to play every night. He believed chess was like life. If you move with pride, you fall. If you move with patience, you win. Olivia leaned forward, her voice softer than before. And what do you do here besides clean? Daniel looked down. I fix things, ma'am. When people leave, I make sure everything works, the lights, the floors, the chairs. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's why you beat me. You fix things even when they seem perfect. For the first time in years, she felt humbled, not angry, not defensive, just quiet. She stood, walked to the window, and said, Daniel, would you stay a while, play another game with me? He smiled politely. Yes, ma'am. They played again, this time longer, slower, her pride gone, her focus clear. And though she lost again, it was different. She learned, she watched, and for the first time in her life, she listened. Days turned into weeks, and something began to shift in Solvane Industries. No one could quite explain it, but people noticed the CEO was different. Olivia, who once ruled with iron words and cold eyes, now paused to listen. Before she spoke, her voice still strong, but no longer sharp. It all began with those quiet mornings in her office. Every Friday at 7, before the company came alive, Daniel, the janitor, would sit across from her, the same small wooden board between them. They would play in silence. The only sound were the click of the chess pieces and the soft hum of the city below. At first, Olivia played to win. Every move was war. Every mistake burned her pride. But Daniel never gloated. He never smiled at her losses. He only said softly, you learn best when you lose, ma'am. And she did. Each match taught her patience, awareness, calm. She began to see her business choices differently. She began to question not only what she was doing, but why. One morning, she looked up mid-game and asked Daniel, do you ever wonder if we all move too fast in life? He looked up, his eyes kind but firm. We do, ma'am. We chase the checkmate so hard we forget the board. That one line stayed in her mind for days. She wrote it down later that night on her office board with a marker. Chase the board, not the checkmate. The words became her new mantra. Soon people started to see small changes. She no longer scolded her employees for small mistakes. She asked questions. Instead, she walked the floors and greeted the janitors by name, something no one could ever remember her doing before. She even surprised the cafeteria staff one day by sitting with them during lunch, quietly listening to their stories. Daniel remained the same, humble, calm, quiet. He worked the night shift, fixing lights, mopping floors, making the office shine. But to him, those morning chess sessions were something sacred. He never bragged, never told anyone. Only his mother knew that the most powerful woman in the city now called him her teacher. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyscrapers, Olivia stood by the window watching her reflection next to the board and said softly, Daniel, what do you see when you look at this company? He thought for a moment, then said, I see a big board, ma'am. Some people are pawns, some are queens. Some forget that pawns can reach the end and become queens too. That line hit her harder than any deal she had ever signed. She turned to him, her eyes soft. You know, Daniel, you might be the only person who has ever made me think before I move. He smiled slightly, then said, that means the game is working, ma'am. And it was the game had changed more than just her. It had changed the way she saw everyone. By the next month, Solvane Industries launched a new initiative called the Board Project, giving scholarships to the children of janitors, cafeteria workers, and low-wage employees across the city. Olivia said publicly that talent can come from any square on the board. But what the press didn't know was that the idea came from one man who cleaned floors and beat her chess in 3 moves. When Daniel's mother found out, she cried quietly at the kitchen table, proud beyond words. She told him her grandfather would have smiled today. Daniel just nodded, looking down at his calloused hands, whispering, "I hope so, Mom, I hope so." Yet behind the respect and gratitude, something deeper began to grow in both hearts, not romance, but a quiet trust, a strange friendship that neither expected. The Queen and the janitor, 2 worlds apart, yet bound by the board. The morning began like any other, but Olivia could feel something wrong the second she stepped into the building. The air was heavy, the whispers louder, the smiles fake. As she reached her office, her assistant hurried toward her, eyes wide with worry. "Ma'am, the investors, they're pulling out of the new expansion deal." The words hit her like a wave. $30 million gone overnight. She slammed her folder on the table, her voice sharp. "Who leaked our proposal? Who did this?" But no one answered. The room stood frozen, silent, afraid of the storm they all knew too well. By noon, the boardroom filled with directors, angry, confused, throwing blame like pieces across a battlefield. Every voice was shouting. No one was listening. The company she built, the empire she ruled, felt like it was crumbling right in front of her. In that chaos, a quiet knock came at the door, and Daniel walked in his plain uniform, holding the chessboard she always kept in her office. The room went silent. The directors stared, confused. Some smirked, thinking it was a joke. Olivia looked at him, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Daniel, not now. Please, this isn't the time." But he didn't move. He just placed the board on the table and said softly, "Ma'am, it's always the time to see the board." Everyone stared at him. Olivia froze, her anger fading just a little as she looked at the board, her mind remembering the countless lessons she'd learned in silence, those early mornings when she thought she was teaching him, but all along he was teaching her. He set the white pieces first, then said, "You've been moving too fast again, ma'am." You saw a clear path and forgot to look at what was hiding behind it. The room fell silent. Olivia leaned back, her eyes softening. "Explain." Daniel pointed to the pieces. "This is your company. Every piece depends on the other, but lately you've been moving your queen alone." He looked at the directors, and when the queen forgets the board, she loses her power, no matter how strong she is. The words hit her deeper than she wanted to admit. She stood up slowly, walking to the window, thinking her reflection cold against the glass. She whispered, "I thought I could handle it all myself." Daniel smiled gently. "Even the best player needs to see all sides, ma'am. Sometimes the pawn standing behind can save the queen from a trap." The boardroom was silent. The directors no longer saw a janitor. They saw a man who spoke truth in a room full of titles. That same evening, Olivia called back the investors one by one, not to beg, but to rebuild the deal on new terms. She made it open, transparent, fair. She included departments that had been ignored, voices that had never been heard. Within a week, confidence returned, the stock rose again, and the company stabilized. When the board met again, she asked Daniel to stand beside her as she announced new policies to share profits with lower staff. The same man who used to mop the floor now stood beside the woman who ruled the tower. Reporters tried to find out who he was, but Daniel refused interviews, saying only, "I'm just a man who plays chess." That night, when everyone left, Olivia sat in her office, staring at the empty chessboard, whispering to herself, "You saved my company, Daniel." He looked back from the doorway, shaking his head. "No, ma'am, you just remembered how to play." Then he walked away, quietly like he always did, leaving her with a lesson deeper than business itself. Days turned into weeks, and life inside the company began to change for the better. People smiled again. Meetings were calmer. The staff felt respected. The board was more united. But there was one person missing: Daniel, the quiet janitor, who had somehow changed everything, had stopped coming to work. Olivia noticed his absence right away. His tools were gone, his locker empty. She asked security. No one had seen him for days. She sent people to his small apartment, but it was locked, cold, untouched. One morning as she arrived at her office, there was an envelope sitting neatly on her desk with her name written in careful handwriting. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a folded letter and a photo of a young Daniel. standing beside a chessboard and a national competition trophy in his hand. The letter read, "Dear Miss Olivia, if you're reading this, it means my time to move on has come. You once asked why a man like me was cleaning floors instead of playing in tournaments. The truth is I lost everything. Once my career, my home, my family after a car accident. I couldn't face the world anymore. Chess was the only thing left that made sense. When I saw you running this empire, I saw a queen moving alone strong, but surrounded by traps. I didn't want you to fall like I did, so I stayed quietly helping where I could. I never wanted credit, only to remind you that every great player wins because they care about the board, not just the crown. You have that power. Now use it well and teach others the same. With respect, Daniel." Olivia pressed the paper to her chest, tears falling freely. She looked at the photo again, realizing that the man she thought was a janitor was once a national champion, a legend who disappeared after tragedy. She organized a ceremony that week not for publicity, but for gratitude. She told the story of Daniel to her employees and renamed the main conference room the Daniel Carter Hall of Vision and Strategy. She placed his photo and the same chessboard they had played on inside a glass case, so no one would ever forget the lesson. Months passed, and every time Olivia felt doubt, she would sit by that board, move one pawn, and remember his words, "The pawn can save the queen." One evening after a long meeting, she found herself staring out the window of her tall office, the city glowing below her. She smiled and whispered softly, "You won, Daniel, you really did." The wind outside felt like an answer. She sat down one last time and set the pieces on the board, whispering, "Your move, old friend." And, as if guided by something unseen, she made the opening 3 moves, the same ones Daniel had once used to win their final game that day. A symbol of victory, a reminder of humility, and a promise that wisdom can come from the unlikeliest of places. The camera fades on Olivia, sitting quietly, the chessboard gleaming under warm light, a single tear of peace rolling down her face as the screen turns black and the words appear. If you believe wisdom can come from anywhere, give this story a like, share it with others, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.